Okay, we're live.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Christopher Mayo. I am the chair of the Professional Development Committee of the Canadian League of Composers. I'm joining you from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. It seems kind of opposite to what we would hope, that the more often we hear these land acknowledgements, the more ubiquitous they become and the less that they act like a disruption space. And so I would encourage all of you to make sure that it is something that disrupts your day, and to make it a reminder of your responsibility to know more about the people who first lived on the land where you live now, and maybe an invitation to address the persistent strains of colonialism in your own life and the institutions that you're involved with. And that's certainly something that we need to do at the CLC and that we're actively working on. The CLC is the organization in Canada that's responsible for advocating for the rights and the interests of professional composers. And we would really like to invite all of you to find out more about the organization on our website, composition.org. And if you're not already a member, so think about becoming a member. We just currently launched our mentorship program for early career composers, which is called Pivot. And applications are open if that's something that you might be interested in. And if you're not so early career, but maybe mid or late career, we are also looking for applications for composers interested in being mentors for the Pivot project. So have a look on our website, and if that's something you might be interested in. Today, we're really very lucky to have Angela Schwarzkopf with us to talk about writing for the harp. She's a supremely talented Juno Award-winning harpist, and I'm sure that we're all going to learn a lot about how to write for this notoriously difficult instrument. I'm going to turn over to her in a moment, but just wanted to let people know that if you have questions, please feel to just type them into the Zoom chat if you are here in Zoom with us, or if you're watching along on Facebook, feel free to comment. And we're going to be watching those questions and collecting them and passing them along to Angela at appropriate moments during the presentation. And you can feel free to submit questions in either French or English, and we can translate as needs be. And with that, I will pass things over to Angela.
Thank you. First of all, I am very excited to be speaking to you all today about the harp, instrument that I love very much. And I really hope that I can share with you a lot of information about the instrument. I think I'm gonna bombard you with a lot of information about the instrument. But hopefully it will be helpful for you in your writing. My goal for you today is to not be scared or intimidated to write for this instrument and to embrace it. And I am always available to composers. If anyone has questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me through my website or social media or any such platform. All right, so I made a PowerPoint, so I'm just gonna bring it up for you guys. And because I'm gonna be sort of going through this PowerPoint and also demonstrating the harp, I would recommend, if you can, if you see my little box, my face floating on the screen, you can kind of enlarge it. You may wanna do that. If anyone is having difficulties visually seeing what I'm doing while the PowerPoint screen share is still on, just drop it in the chat, and then somebody from CLC can let me know, and I'll come in and out of it so that you can better see what I'm doing at the instrument. All right, so let's talk about writing for the harp. So I just wanted to quickly go over what I'm going to be talking to you about today. I'm going to do a brief history of the harp, because I truly do believe that kind of understanding where the harp came from and the harp that we have today can be really helpful in your writing. I'm going to talk about sort of the basics of writing for the harp, some of the unique features that the harp has, and some of the common pitfalls that often is seen in compositions. Then we're going to dive into extended harp techniques, and I'm going to show you a lot of the wild things the harp can do. This is not an exhaustive list. It would be impossible for me to show you them all, but I'm going to try and show you as many as possible. And I'm going to perform examples for you, and I'm going to, hopefully there'll be time to show you some pieces that have utilized them really well. And then we'll have hopefully time for questions. All right, so let's dive in. We're going to talk about the history of the harp. So the harp has been in history since forever, and early artistic representations of the harp were found all over the place, in tombs, on graves, by altars. The earliest one they think has been placed in art around 2800 BCE. So the harp is a very old instrument. It was found all over the place, wall paintings, etc. It was also found basically everywhere in the world, which we often think of the harp as just being from maybe Egypt, but actually the harp was developing in multiple countries simultaneously. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Israel, China, Japan, India, Greece are just some of the places. And these early harps took on a lot of different types of shapes. They could be, as you see in the list, they could be like a boat shape or an arch shape. Some of the earliest people, some of the researchers of the harp believe that the earliest instruments maybe were derived out of a bow and arrow. So there's some thought to that when we think about the early shapes of the harp. The first authenticated evidence of a harp is from somewhere around 2600 BCE, so very, very old. And the harp was played in a lot of ways, not necessarily traditionally as we see harpists now, but it could be standing, it could be kneeling, they could be using a plectrum, they could be using their hands. So lots of interesting ways. This is a very condensed history of the harp. So the harp continued to evolve, and especially in Europe in the Middle Ages, it became more prominent, and we see it a lot in religious representations in the Bible, and it's mentioned in the Bible, those sorts of things. The harp at this point, prior to this, it was maybe one or two pieces. Now the harp is comprised of about three main components, which is essentially what the harp we have today is, which is we have a sound box, we have a pillar that goes across the top, the string arm, and then we have the column. So as early as the Middle Ages, we already kind of have our shape set up for the harp. And then into the 17th and 18th century, we see that the harps are developing alongside music and the music's need for harp. So we have harps with one set of strings. We have harps with two set of strings, and this is all people's way of problem solving the increasing chromaticism or needs within music. So if there were two sets of strings, the harp didn't necessarily just need to play all the naturals of the scale. They could start to get some of the sharp and flat pitches. And then we have three sets of strings. Typically, a harp from the Baroque era would have three sets of strings. They're totally wild. If you see, there's a harpist in the city of Toronto, Julia Seeger-Scott. She plays a Baroque harp, and it's just mind-boggling to me how you can get around three sets of strings. I'll stick with just one. And we also saw hook harps, which are kind of like the early lever harps. If you've ever seen a Celtic or a lever harp, most of you are mostly probably concerned with writing for the harp and the pedals and dealing with that, but these harps have, instead of pedals that are controlled with the feet, they have little levers at the top of the strings that are controlled with the hand. And these harps are generally played a lot when people are just starting out playing the harp, but that is to say that also these harps can be played very seriously and at a very high level, and the music for them can be interesting and complex, but unfortunately I won't be getting into that type of harp today. We also have our first single action pedal harp that shows up during these 2 centuries, which is the single action pedal harp. So now instrument makers are exploring how to keep both hands on the strings instead of having to lift up and change levers by having pedals at the base of the harp that in effect do that through a complicated system of rods that run through the base of the harp, up the column, and then come out at the top of the harp, and then add pressure and adjust the strings. We'll talk more about that, no worries. So during this time, the harps are starting to get bigger because the mechanism is getting more complicated, so the instruments need to be bigger to accommodate it. We start seeing more strings. Some of these early harps would have had like 3, 4, 5 strings. Now we're seeing up to 43 strings. The current largest harp model you have has 47, just for reference. And as early as this period of time, we're starting to see coloring system within strings that we use today, which is all our C's are red and all of our F's are black. So when you see harps with the colored strings, that is what you're seeing. So what is really interesting is in the 19th century, people are still trying to figure out how to deal with increasing chromaticism in music. And so we have things that pop up like the double action pedal harp and the chromatic harp. And the chromatic harp, it still exists. It's still around and you can see it. But if you look at this picture here, you'll see that it has 2 sets of strings and they kind of cross in the middle like an X. And one of our most beloved pieces in the harp repertoire, the Debussy Dances, was actually written for this harp. And it's kind of fun that there was this little battle that happened between these 2 harp makers, the maker of the chromatic harp and the maker of the pedal harp. And they wanted to promote their harp and make everyone believe that their model of harp was the best for dealing with chromaticism in music and could do the most things. And so they commissioned composers to write for their instruments to showcase them at their best. And so Debussy wrote this piece, this beautiful harp concerto, that was supposed to only be playable on chromatic harp. And Ravel wrote the introduction in Allegro, and that piece truly can only be played on the pedal harp. It utilizes a lot of glissandi on the harp, which with unique pedal combinations, which can only be done on a double action pedal harp. Whereas poor Debussy's piece could in fact be played on another harp and has been edited and made possible to be played on a double action pedal harp, which I mean, we're all grateful for because we do love to perform it. So some more important changes when we get with the double action pedal harp. The harp can play in all major and minor keys. We have a larger overall harp again. We have a more consistent tone through the instrument. And the cool thing about the double action pedal harp is we can have enharmonic notes, which is fantastic. So when we hop into the 20th century, both the double action pedal harp, chromatic harp were used. It was at the start of the 20th century that we had this Debussy Ravel showdown in repertoire. People were really pushing the limits and capabilities of the harp and trying to see how far it could go. So we had harps that went up to 48 strings. It settled at 47 being the maximum that we had, and we're starting to see harps being made in North America. Lyon & Healy is our major harp developer in North America. And so this harp here is made by Lyon & Healy. And it's interesting, and I like to include it when I'm talking about the harp because the model is called Salzedo, the Salzedo model. And that's really important because Salzedo was an incredibly influential harpist in the 20th century. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about him during this presentation because he truly was a pioneer for what the harp could do and really pushing its capabilities. And so this Lyon & Healy created this model of harp for him, which is very beautiful. It's still being made today. And Salzedo had a lot of crazy ideas. Some were great, some were weird. He also devised a new coloring system for the strings where all of the C's were green, all of the purples, all of the F's were purple, and all the other notes were red, which is very different than what we have today. It did not stick around. Okay, that was your crash course on the history of the harp. So we get to the harp we have today. So we have double action pedal harps. I'm using that term, and I realize that a lot of you may not actually know what that means. So I'm going to get into that more in this section when we talk about the harp and pedals. So harps come in a variety of different sizes. The harp I'm going to talk to you about today is the full-size concert grand harp, the one that's the farthest to the right in this slideshow. At least it's to my right, probably your right. But you can see various different models of harp. We've got small lap harps, we've got electro harps, lots of options in the full-size concert grand harps. We also have electric acoustic instruments. There are wild things that we can do with that I won't be getting into today. I have an acoustic harp, although I do have pickups installed in it. Okay, so let's talk about the parts of the harp. So the basic parts that were showing up early in history was the sound box, the column and the neck of the harp, and of course the bass. So if you look at this picture, you see the petals that are hanging out at the bottom of the harp. There are rods that are connected to those petals that run through the base of the harp, up the column of the harp, inside that column, and come out across the top. And then they've got a nice little close-up here in this image that shows you the discs on the harp. So what happens is that we have one pedal for every note of the scale, and that pedal operates in essentially 3 positions: flat, natural, and sharp, and it will control. So if I play the C pedal, it's going to control all the C's on the harp. If I press the D pedal, it's going to control all the D's on the harp. And so depending on which position I put the pedal in, the discs at the top of the harp will add tension to the string and raise the pitch. They'll shorten the length of the string. So if the pedal is in the top position, there's no added tension on the string. The harp is in flat. If I move the pedal down, the first disc in the picture there turns and tightens and touches the string. It shortens the length of the string, and then the pitch becomes raised, it becomes natural. And when I move the pedal into the bottom position, it becomes sharp. The second disc moves over and engages the string. The length of the string becomes shorter again, the pitch becomes higher, and we get our sharp. Okay. So the parts of the harp. All right, so let's get into effectively writing for the harp. So here's some harp basics. So this is the range of the harp for you to take a look at. And one really important thing to note, so on every string on the harp, I can make my naturals and sharps and flats, except the bottom 2 strings, okay? Those strings are so thick that I can't, there are no discs there to change the pitch. I can tune those strings to be anything that I want. I can make it so it's a low D and a low C. I can make it D flat, D natural, D sharp, whatever I want. One thing that you want to watch out for is that I can't change those while I'm playing unless you physically build it into your piece that I can stand up, go around, and tune those strings. Which is not to say you can't. There are pieces that have that in there, but it's something to be aware of. If I'm playing the whole time and you want a C natural and then you want a C flat, I can't make that happen. I'm going to have to pick one or the other on those very low 2 strings. Alrighty, so I'm going to go sit at the harp, and if anyone's having problems seeing me, you can let me know, just to show you, just so you can physically see that when I play the harp, my right hand plays the upper range of the instrument, my left hand plays the lower range of the instruments. I am short, and I have short arms, and I will share that with you. But it's probably good because I'm showing you what's realistic for most harpists. Some people who have longer limbs can do more, but my right arm can only reach so far on the harp, right? My left arm can reach all the way to the bottom. My left arm can reach all the way to the top of the harp as well, but my left arm has a limited range that it can produce. And so if you have me playing a lot very low in the harp, I may have to put the harp down so that I can reach further down. But it's just something to be aware of, that it can be quite difficult if we're expected to play very low with our right arm. And we can play high in both hands as well. That is possible. It may not be the most comfortable in the world, but it is possible. Okay. So let's talk about the ranges of the harp and how those sound. So the upper register of the harp is generally brighter, and it has really good clarity. It does not resonate for a long time. So if we're just doing some chords, my harp rings pretty nice. You can hear it ringing, but it is quite clear, quite crisp. The middle range of the harp is really the sweet spot. That's where the harp is most resonant, but it's also really clear, and it creates this really warm, rich tone. It rings really beautifully. And then the lowest range of the harp is the most resonant. The strings are longer, so it stands to reason that they would vibrate longer. It can become very unclear if you write things that are very fast in the bass line. And I'm saying this to provide you with information, but I've definitely played pieces that have a fast bass line, and it can be done and it can be worked and it can be made possible, but it's something to consider in your writing, that you can lose a lot of clarity in the bass. Oof, if I get way down here. It's gonna ring for a long time, but it's not. You can hear the sound gets muddy the more I add to it. It starts to lose definition and clarity. All right. So we already started talking a little bit about the pedals and the different positions they can move in. This is a helpful diagram just to see the layout of the harp. This is also a helpful diagram because this is how harpists notate their pedal points within their piece. So I would make a diagram like this at the beginning of my song, and it would be very helpful for composers if you have a starting in not a standard key, like you have this in B flat major, but you also want to have a C sharp. You could use a pedal diagram like this at the beginning, and then I might put these at landmark moments throughout the piece, so if I need to stop or start, especially my practice, I can easily do so. So in this little diagram here, it starts with this T shape, and then we have on the left side D, C, B. Those are all controlled by our left foot. And on the right side, we have E, F, G, A, which are all controlled by our right foot. So it is possible for us to move two pedals at one time. Usually our right has to pretty much be our right and our left foot moving at the same time. The left foot can reach around the pedals because they are they're divided and there's a gap in between. It can reach over and grab the E pedal, but I would say that's probably as far as most harpists can do in a pinch, is to get around and get that pedal. It's not very comfortable, but it is definitely doable. So you can see in this diagram that if a note is flat, we have it in the top position of the diagram. If it's natural, we kind of put it through the middle line, and if it's sharp, we put it at the bottom. So one of the biggest challenges that I find in compositions with composers is not giving maybe enough time for pedal changes to occur. You also don't want to be totally afraid from using them. We can do them and we can move our feet quite quickly. So you just want to make sure that what you're asking for is achievable, that there's enough time. I can move 2, 3, 4 pedals pretty quick, but we still need that second or so to make it happen, especially depending on what we're coming from or what we're going to, what's ringing on the harp. All these are considerations. All right. So how to mark pedals. I showed you that pedal chart that you can pop at the beginning, and then you can just use the letter names within the piece itself. Some harpists prefer to put in their own pedal changes because they like to map them out where they want them to be in the piece. My preference is always to have composers put them in, and I feel that way because I think it allows the composer to really think about what's possible, and they can visually see all the changes that are happening. We can pedal a lot and we can pedal really frequently, and a lot is possible, and it's usually just really helpful. I find that more errors will be caught if pedals are put in, and then I can go ahead and adjust them and move them around if I need them in other places. If you are putting them in, we mark them under the staff. Pretty much typically, sometimes we put them in the middle of the staff, but we don't ever really put them at the top of the staff. And if you are marking more than one pedal at one time, we generally mark the right foot over top of the left foot. So that would be our EFGA pedal would be marked over top of our DCB pedal. And that also can change depending on your training. I think in North America, harpists generally mark their pedals that way. In Europe, I think they do left over right. So it's kind of a location thing. All right. So moving on. So we obviously play the harp with our fingers and hands, and we use 4 fingers, not 5. So that's an important one in case you didn't know. We don't use our pinkies. There are some male harpists who have very large hands and can somehow get their pinkies on the string. It completely changes how your hand has to be positioned on the harp if you have to use your little finger. It is not in common practice now, except for maybe one male harpist I can think of who does it. I can't. So we can play up to 4 notes in each hand at a time, unless we're playing a rolled chord that extends the harp. So by that, I mean I could do something like this, where I can cross one hand over the other to create a long chord. The other thing you want to think about is the span of the chord and the stretch between the fingers. So again, I have small hands, but I have a pretty big stretch between my hands. So you just want to think about the layout of the chord. Obviously, between my first and second finger, I can make a bigger stretch. If you have a really big stretch between the fourth and the third, like a fifth, that's not really going to be comfortable. We're going to have to refinger it, which not to say that we can't, but just to consider sort of the range of your chord, how spread out it is, and how feasible it would be if you are expecting them to play 8 notes at one time and say all at the same time solid, making sure that it's actually within a range that a harpist can comfortably grab. I can say most harpists I think could play up to about a 1/10 in both hands, if that is helpful. Okay, so let's talk about chords. So we're back to talking about Salzedo. He's a very important guy. If you don't know about Salzedo, I would definitely check him out. His first name's Carlos Salzedo. So Salzedo had a lot of method books and a lot of rules that create some confusion. So I'm going to just touch on how he thought about chords now. He had a rule that all chords over 2 notes should be rolled. And so essentially anything in music that is over 2 notes stacked on top of each other, we would roll it. So I think a lot of harpists tend to play their chords rolled even when they're not marked to do so. I would say if you have a particularly strong preference in your composition, if you would like something solid or if you would like something specifically rolled, that I would mark that. The roll chord symbol, I don't have an image in here, is like a wiggly line next to the chord. Sometimes we use a solid chord marking, which is just like a bracket around the side of the chord. And you can always use words to specify if you have a strong preference. Otherwise, the harpist will kind of interpret and make a decision based on the character of the piece. And then again, if you have a large chord of more than 8 notes, it will have to be rolled. Okay, so the harp is a very resonant instrument, as you probably heard just in my few little demos. It is possible, and you've seen me doing it, to muffle the strings as I play. So if I have strings ringing, if I put my hands on the strings, I can stop it. I don't know if you can hear it, but the bass of my harp is still ringing because the whole harp is vibrating when you pluck. So usually when harpists muffle, they have to get, if they want a clear sound, the whole harp. Now, if you want harpists to muffle, that means that we are using our hands to do that and not play. So you have to take into consideration, if you do want to muffle the music, that both or one hand will be removed from playing in order to do that. We can do them pretty quick. Something like that if you wanted to just clear up the sound. We can also do single note muffles. So say I wanted to take out just one pitch of that chord. I could do that and let the other ones continue to ring. And again, Salzedo came up with lots of different ways of notating muffles in specific ranges. Generally, a muffle sign is a plus with a circle around it. Okay, so if you have, again, a strong preference with harmony, sometimes when we see rests in music, we kind of ignore them because we're like, well, does it really mean I need to stop? It's not like the piano or another instrument where I can press down a key or stop blowing air or lift my bow for the duration of the rest, it's going to keep ringing. So often some harpists will be very good about muffling every time they say a rest. Others will let it ring. So if you have, again, a strong preference, you might want to mark in those muffles or clarify at the beginning of your piece what your intention is. So one of the most cool and unique things the harp can do is enharmonic notes. And so we can double all the pitches on the harp except for D, G, and A. So a common thing that I see happens in music is composers utilize enharmonics, but they don't consider that there then are things I can't do. So for example, I cannot play a C sharp, and a D all at the same time because that would require 3 different pedal settings. I can, however, play a C and a C sharp at the same time by using a D flat instead. So if I have my C sharp and my D flat, I'm plucking 2 different strings, but the pitch is the same. This is a great way in your pieces to create some interesting sounding glissandi, because you can set your pedals to kind of reflect different tonalities that you might want in that. And it can be used in 100 different ways. Sometimes I use them in pieces if it's easier to reach than another note. So they're used often. All right, let's talk about harmonics. So the harp can produce several harmonics on any given string. The best sounding harmonic is in the middle of the string. There it is. You can also get one in the top range of the harp. It just won't be as rich as the one in the middle of the string. The right hand can only play 1 harmonic at a time based on the way our hand position is to play harmonics. Our left hand can play 1, 2, and even 3 harmonics in the left hand. It depends on the span of the harmonics you want and kind of the range that you're in. Usually 1 or 2 sounds best in the left hand. So in the right hand, I use a position that only allows me to make 1. In the left hand, I can do 1, I can do 2, I can do 3. But if I spread out those 3 into a chord, you're hearing I'm not really getting the bottom note as a harmonic. I would have to work pretty hard at that to see if I could get that bottom note to sound as a harmonic. So it's not as good. Harmonics sound the best on gut or nylon strings. I haven't discussed what the harp strings are made out of yet, but harps are made primarily out of gut and nylon strings. Most concert grand pedal harps, like the one I'm playing today, will have primarily gut strings on them with maybe a few nylon strings at the top. And then we have the wire strings at the bottom. Harmonics just ring better on those strings versus the wire strings. You're hearing it's not sounding so good the lower I go. It creates its own sound, so it could be what you're looking for in terms of sound quality. This is a really helpful diagram that I found online that shows what is a pretty solid range for single harmonics or double harmonics, triple harmonics throughout the harp. Keep in mind that as I move up the harp, so once I get above middle C, maybe around the F or the G, I'm going to have to switch to my right hand. My left hand will no longer be able to make that sound, and same thing with the right hand. Once I get a little bit below middle C, I'm going to have to switch to my left hand. So depending on when you're writing, you'll have to consider which hand can kind of hit which range when you're doing single harmonics. But this is pretty stable. Often I see issues of people writing harmonics just higher or lower than physically can be produced. Okay, so now where to write harmonics in your music. So Salzedo, our best friend, decided that harmonics should be written in music where they sound, so that the harpist must execute them, play them an octave lower. Prior to Salzedo and following Salzedo, pretty much everyone else writes the harmonics where the harpist needs to play them. I know that in my experience working with composers, a lot of them have read up on Salzedo and will write them where they sound. That's fine. You can write it whichever way you want, but you do, if you are not writing them where they are played, you should specify that harmonics are where they sound, so that we know to play them an octave lower. Usually, principal elimination, we can figure it out, but it's always wise. All right. So let's talk about glissandi on the harp. So as I had mentioned earlier, that this was a unique feature of the double action pedal harp. Just taking a sip of coffee there. So we can create different tonalities and chords based on how we set out our pedals, which is really great. I actually have, one of my favorite things I have is this like chart here, and it tells me like, this is really great for me, especially if I'm playing pop music. So if I'm playing like a C6 chord, it tells me exactly what pedals I need to make that tonality. It's really handy. I do sometimes use it in classical music, kind of depending as well. But you can have a lot of fun. There are a lot of different types of glissandi that you can make on the harp. Tons and tons and tons. It is usually helpful if you want a specific tonality for your glissando to notate it in the first octave of notes, and then after that you can use wiggly line if you want. I'm going to show you a bunch of different notational systems. So you can have just sort of large notes like that, and we see the tonality all the way up. You can use the word gliss, short form for glissando. You can do it with metric numbers, but that's usually a little unclear. But it is also an option. You can do it like this, where you have it going to a note. These are all taken from Marcel Tournier's music, which is another famous 20th century harpist composer. He's spent his life living in France and taught at the Paris Conservatory, and he also is the person I wrote my doctoral dissertation on, so hence why I'm going to use some examples from his writing right now, because I'm the most familiar with it. But here is just examples of, you can do glissandi that have a note, like a kind of a hint of where you're going to, but you know, that's sort of like a goal to get to, but you don't actually have to land there. That's one way of notating that. You can also use a little X or like a flowery type symbol, any kind of symbol like that at the meeting point of glissandi, so that we know that that's like an approximate arrival point, and it's not necessarily that we actually land there specifically. So it was sort of used to impose, in some early music, a limit without a specific ending note, just to be helpful. You can have really tiny little glissandi, which is, Tournier called them glissando piccolo. So you can see here, they're just very short, very quick glissandi. You can have glissandos that are coming out of a big rolled chord, like this one here. You can have double glissandos with 2 fingers, plain. So just so we know what a glissando sounds like on the harp. So they can be slow, they can be fast and loud, they can be short, they can be double glissandos. They can be done with 1 hand, 2 fingers, or 2 hands. You can have triple glissandos. Ravel uses those in his introduction in Allegro. But what you will notice with the more notes you add to your glissando, the less resonant it becomes, because you are essentially dampening notes that have just been played and ringing. So if we listen to the resonance between them, this is a single note glissando, and then a double note, and a triple. So the texture of the glissando will change, and the resonance will change as well, a bit depending on how many notes are ringing at any given time. And then this is what Tournier uses the term as mixed arpeggio, which is basically running an arpeggio into a glissando. Fancy way of saying it. So glissandos, glissandi can come really out of anything in your playing. Okay, so I want to talk to you about staccatos at the harp, because this is another fun thing that is often very confusing. So on the harp, we cannot create a true staccato as you would on the piano in terms of like that really precise detachment that comes. We can express staccatos with our articulation. We can use a detached fingering that can create a staccato-like sound. We can muffle the string right after we can play it. We can do a few different things. I'll demonstrate them for you now. If I am interpreting a staccato with my articulation, it may sound something like this. Oh, geez, sorry. As opposed to where I'm trying very hard to make a legato sound. If I detach my fingers, again, it'll sound more lifted. I can do, sorry. With that hand, I can muffle them right after I play them. I can play and muffle with my other hand. And if I'm moving by step, I can use my second finger. Oh, I'm not doing very well. To do like a scale or a run of staccato-like notes. And if you wanted that particular effect, you may want to write finger 2 over top of them. The harpist will know exactly how to execute that. So you can see that we're not getting a staccato exactly the way that you may anticipate it. And sometimes in music, for example, Salcedo would use staccatos in his music, not as staccatos, but to indicate that he didn't want you to attach your fingering. So connect your fingers, move from one finger to the next. You would come off the strings fully and then put your finger back on for the next thing to create a detachment-like sound. So this is a term we use a lot at the harp, près de la table, which means like playing close to the soundboard, and it creates a kind of guitar-like sound. So it can be pretty fun to play around with. You can notate it in your music in a number of different ways. You can use the term près de la table. You can use the short form PDLT. You can use a small wavy line or a large wavy line. We're going to see it in further examples that are coming up. You'll see it marked different ways. In fact, it was even already in some of the glissandos we looked at. So I'll try to point it out to you when another example comes with it. So here are a list of the most common pitfalls I see when people are writing for the harp. Writing for 5 fingers, when we have in fact 4 that we use at the harp. Needing the lowest pitch to be changed throughout the piece. Multiple pedals at one time, so I'm talking like you want us to play 3 pedals at one time. We can't do that. Too many harmonics at times, so expecting us to play 2 harmonics in our right hand when we can only play 1. Needing more hands or feet than are possible to play a passage, so just like a very dense texture that we can't really navigate. Writing too fast for the clarity or the effect, and this will come up a lot in the extended techniques we're talking about. Sometimes I'll have someone write an extended passage that they want me to play all with my fingernails, and the tempo is too fast for me to articulate the sound effectively. Writing something that is outside of the reach of our arms, writing staccatos too fast for us to be able to articulate them, or in a range that maybe would be unclear. Obviously, since the bass of the harp is the most resonant, making staccatos in the bass will be the most challenging to do. But also can sound really effective. It can be really, give you that nice sound. Repeated notes that are too fast or too close together, or in a range of the harp, like in the bass, where it gets too buzzy, unless that, of course, is the texture you're that you would like the sound to be. And then misuse of enharmonics, so asking for 3 pitches at the same time that we cannot only do 2 of. Okay, this is my favorite part, extended harp techniques. So when we're notating extended harp techniques in your compositions, you can do it a number of different ways. You can use a legend at the start, especially if you're using new techniques or techniques that are not commonly used. This is a really great way to do it. Or you can mark them within the piece. So I'm going to show you some examples. This is from Canadian harpist and composer Caroline Lizotte, her piece Raga, which is for 2 harps. And I hope I'll have time to show you a clip of a recent performance of that. She uses a lot of new techniques on the harp with mallets like this, and playing them on the strings, tapping the strings with them, playing them on the soundboard. And so she's notated them all there, and I will be demonstrating some of that for you shortly. You can also have them a notation of your effect, just kind of written underneath the start of the piece. This is by another harpist composer, Charlene Wallace, who lives in Toronto. This is from her piece Winter Still. And then here, this is a piece by Monica Pierce, Attach, and this is an example of how she's explained what she wants for extended techniques within the score. So she has 3 different techniques marked. She's got vibrate, or the vibrato sound effect, which I'll show you shortly, a whistle sound effect, and then a circular motion one, which is kind of a little bit her ingenuity, I'm gonna say. All right, so here we go. So most of the effects I'm gonna show you today come out of a book about Carlos Salcedo, and they were his innovations. He was really, really innovative with the different sounds that the harp can make. So I thought I'd use those as a starting point. He made really fun names for all of them too. So this is Rolling Surf, and it's usually played in the lower part of the harp, slower, and kind of creates this like water bubbly effect, I think. So it would be kind of like. Kind of get that effect. It's sort of like small glissandos almost, but it could be more. You could use a lot of fingers to create that effect. Okay, he has one big flux. Oh my gosh, some of these titles. So this is played like a glissando, but closer to the soundboard. This is an example of what a PDLT can look like if you use a wavy line. And here you'll notice that Salcedo has put the wavy line at the top of the staff for one and at the bottom for the other. It's indicating which hand is using it. So if you want a piece of music where just the right hand is playing PDLT, you can notate that by putting a wavy line at the top of the staff. And if you want just the bass line to be PDLT, the base of the staff, or if both hands, you can put it in the middle. So your glissando would sound like this. Kind of a fun color. So this is his Xylo Flux. It's very similar. It's a glissando played close to the soundboard, but this time with your nail. To work on my thumb. All right, so it makes a very like wooden clicky sound. Falling Hail is played with multiple nails at the back of the hand on the harp, creating that same clicky thing. It can be loud, but it's, in the grand scheme of how loud the harp can go, it's not that loud. And sorry, I should have said that that little nail symbol at the top is how it's indicated that you want nails to be used. They've got wavy lines showing you that it's like a glissando. You can see that they've got the pitches notated to tell you what to set your pedals to. The 3 wavy lines indicate to me that I'm going to use my 3 middle fingers to do it. All kinds of little visuals there that give me a hint as to what I'm doing. So this is a gushing chord. It's a quick upward glissando. It can be very rhythmic, and it can go upward or downward. It can kind of be done in different ranges of the harp. It's usually a bit longer in range, which is why we're calling it a gushing chord. We'll get to some other ones soon. Aeolian tremolo, which is rubbing of the strings to create this rustling sound. This will be most effective on the bass wires of the harp. I can do it. Just really take off my ring. Up here, I can just get a lot more resonance going on the bass wires. So this is an Aeolian chord. It's a little bit different than the gushing chord in that it's going to be a shorter, smaller, quicker glissando, or as Tournier would have called it, a glissando piccolo. So it's a short rhythmic glissando that's played over a very specific set of pitches, and it can be, again, ascending or descending. So the gushing chords were long, the Aeolian are going to be shorter span. And you can see here he's used the wavy line to indicate that it's going to be a gliss type thing, and an arrow to tell you what direction to make that glisten. So if I was going to play that, everything would be downward. This is actually from a piece by Salcedo called Song of the Night. So it would be like, but it would have different pedals than what I just did. Oh yeah. Love this one, the thunder effect. I love this one because everyone always thinks the harp sounds so beautiful all the time, and I love doing it because it makes the harp sound really ugly and surprises people. So this is created over the very lowest strings of the harp. We play them very quickly, and the strings vibrate so much that they bash into each other, and it creates a very jarring effect. So it sounds like thunder. I love it. So if we want to go the polar opposite in terms of volume and quality, we have the whistling sounds. This is played with the palm of my hand on the wire strings in an upward or downward gesture. It can be slow, it can be fast, but it's generally a very soft sound effect. Very soft. I can do it. Slow. I can do it quick. It can be rhythmic. I can isolate one finger on a string as well. So there's a number of different ways to produce the whistling sound effect. Pedal slides. This is another fun thing that the harp can do. So this is created by us moving the pedal after a string has been played. And you can create a wide range of moves with this depending on where in the harp you want to produce this tone. So if you do it on the higher strings, it's going to be a bit gentler. If you do it on the wire strings, it's going to be a bit more aggressive. It can be done rhythmically, it can be done fast or slow, lots of different ways. So let's do an example. So I only pluck the string one time, but I can go 3 pitches from it. So that's where up here it's going to be a bit subtler. It could also be used within a chord that's not as obvious, but on the wire strings. So I did that pretty slow in terms of pedal movement, so I can create a longer and more dramatic effect. I can do it fast, just as I did in the upper range as well. You won't be able to do the top range ones quite. You can do them slower, but it won't have quite the same effect just because the resonance of the string will be shorter because it is a shorter string. All right. So this is called plectric sounds, or basically playing with your nails is commonly referred to. So we can pluck with our nails instead of our fingers, which we play the harp with our fingertips. The thing is that most harpists don't have much nails to work with because we generally keep them very short so that they don't get in the way when we're playing the harp. However, I often will grow them just a little bit to have a nice, cool nail sound in a piece. Generally, we play this close to the soundboard to just create a bit of a clearer tone color. And I did a demonstration, not of the tones that are there, but I played 2 in my right hand and 1 in my left hand. I could play 3 in my right hand. But this is an example where you want to give the harpist time to get her fingers on the strings in order to do that. And if you have a lot of nails, it's hard to get them on very quickly and fast. So you want to make sure that the harpist has time. Even there, I didn't get that last one on, to produce the effect. It's a pretty good one though. Okay, so this is called tympanic sounds, which is tapping on the soundboard. We also can knock on the soundboard or all over the harp. Usually when we're knocking, it's an X to indicate that we're knocking versus tapping. So when we knock on the soundboard, usually it's lower down. We can do up high on the back of the harp to create different qualities of the sound. Tapping on this harp would be I can make different rhythmic patterns with tapping as well, but it's not quite as loud. So when you see it in harp writing, again, this is used in Song of the Night by Salzedo is a good example. He has the other hand that's playing regular notes at the time being very soft so that that sound effect comes through. Another one of my favorite sound effects because it sounds really ugly. This is our metallic sounds, and this is created by holding a pedal between 2 notches. That's why there's that like crazy cymbal at the top there. So it creates this wild brassy sound. I think it sounds the best in the wire strings because it just sounds the most aggressive. I can, where is it? I can make it in the upper range as well, but I like it in the bass because it sounds really, but depends again what you prefer. Okay, this is xylophonic sounds. This is a really fun technique, and in fact, Winter Still, which I showed an example of earlier by Charlene Wallace, uses this really well. I'll demonstrate, and then I'll play actually the opening of Charlene's piece, just so you can hear how it can be effectively used in a piece. So this is a technique that requires both of our hands. So one hand, our left hand, is muffling the strings at the base of the harp. The other hand is plucking the strings. So it creates that kind of fun sound quality. And if I play, oops, a little bit of Charlene's piece at the start, you can see she has one hand playing, the other hand holding. That was a really great way of combining xylophonic sounds and regular playing. She just had me remove a finger every couple of bars, which created that color change. Very cool. Vibrant sounds, also known as vibrato on the harp. This is, again, another technique that uses both of our hands. We need them both free in order to do this. The right hand is going to pluck this time, and the left hand is going to produce the effect. So how this works is that the left hand is going to press the string between the discs and the pegs at the top of the harp, and they're going to we're going to pluck, and then we're going to press. And you're going to get that pitch bend that happens. This technique works the best actually on nylon strings, and I don't have that many nylon strings on my harp right now. I tend to prefer the sound of gut, but if I am playing a piece that requires a lot of vibrato, I will often change and put some nylon strings on just because we'll get an even better sound. This effect is best in the upper register. It's very difficult to bend the pitches of lower strings. It's possible. It gets a little harder on the hands. You can also have harpists pluck the string in that range as well. Makes a very soft sound, but it's effective. Caroline Lizotte uses it in one of her pieces. So now I have a list of miscellaneous effects because I really, as much as I would like, don't have time to show you absolutely everything that the harp can do. But these are a few more of my favorites, and I have my harp box with my toys for making cool sounds on the harp. So the first one doesn't use any toys. This is the gong effect, and it's used with the flat of our hand. We hit the wire strings. It sounds like a gong. It can also be done in the mid-range of the harp as well. It can be done higher up as well, but you lose more of that gong sound. Tuning key glissandos. So a typical harp tuning key today looks like this. It's wrapped in plastic. So harpists will need, especially if you use this technique in their piece, probably depending on your arrangement, they may need time to get the right tuning key. So I have one here that I had to order online, and it has a metal shaft, and I can pluck the string and I press the tuning key into it, and I can create a slide. I can also use it, and if I mark it ahead of time, I can find specific pitches on it. It works really nicely. Oops. On the longer strings, because we get a really good wah type sound versus up here you'll get just like a shorter sound. I don't think I've had, let's see. It's not as effective on the wire strings, but it is possible. Okay, this is another one that I really enjoy doing, is using paper in the strings of the harp. There's a whole concerto that uses this, and for the life of me, I can't remember who wrote it, but Salzedo uses it in his harp and piano sonata. So the harpist has to string it through. So if you're writing a piece, either this is a good effect to use in a specific range that you want this color in, or to have it set up at the beginning of the piece and then the harpist can take it out. Or if you're writing a chamber piece, giving time for the harpist to string it through partway through the piece. Those are all considerations you need with this guy. But it creates a pretty cool sound. So that's a fun one. It takes more time to put it in than take it out. We can also pluck a string with a guitar pick or some such thing. We can do it high, low, on all the strings in all the ranges. This was fun. I played a piece by an Icelandic composer that was an animated score, so I don't have a way of showing this to you, unfortunately. But this is a honey dipper, and he had, this is for 4 harps. We had them in our strings like this, and we would occasionally bat it around. It has to be the right thickness of honey dipper for harpists to be able to use it in their wire strings, but it's pretty fun. And the last one is using these fun mallets. This is from Caroline Lizotte's piece. I don't know what this mallet is made out of. I think she keeps it like top secret because it's like one of her special techniques. But this one I think is just a super ball. You just want to be careful. So this is really cool. I call it whale sounds. I think it sounds amazing. This particular one that is her like special top secret one, can create actually a pitch, a notated pitch. This other one doesn't create as defined a pitch. It does create a pitch, but it's a little bit different. You can also, you can't see, bounce it on the soundboard. I can't do that with the other mallet. It would damage the instrument, so we have to be careful about that. I can also use it to hit the strings. To create some cool sounding effects. So those are some of my favorite things to do with the harp. And, oh yes, so this is an example of how you can combine some effects on the harp to be really cool. This is a combination of rhythmic glissandos. This is another salzetto piece, scintillation, where essentially the whole middle part of his piece is like rhythmic glissandos with various pedal changes and played, notated in different ranges of the harp. So if I was going to demonstrate a bit of this, which I realize I haven't played this piece in like a very long time. It sounds pretty cool. I'm doing the same thing with my hands over and over again, but the pedals are moving. So he's combined the use of the pedals moving, glissandi, and rhythmic glissandi, and to create kind of a really cool sounding piece. With extended techniques, they usually work best to accentuate a particular character or moment you want in the piece rather than a whole piece of extended techniques. That being said, they can be used really effectively as full pieces. I guess you just need to think about kind of what your objective is. Sometimes I feel like I haven't plucked a note in a really long time when I'm playing pieces with a lot of extended techniques, so we can do a lot of different things. So I wanted to show you this. I'm going to show you a couple examples for Maga, and then I'm going to actually play you a recent performance that I gave of this piece with Judy Lohman. And so this is, as I mentioned, a two-harp piece. I showed you sort of the legend she had at the beginning. So if you see in the second harp part, this is the mallet that will be played on the harp, and it shows you in the top the pitch that's going to be produced. And here's how it continues. Harp 2 will hit the strings with a mallet, moving down the harp through the opening. Harp 1 will be playing Bisbee Leondo, and then they start moving a metal tuning key on the string on one of the notes in the Bisbee Leondo. So it makes a very cool effect. So this is from the opening of the piece. I'm going to play it for you. Yeah, I think I'll do that now. So 1 second, bear with me while I stop sharing my screen so that I can get the video up and share that with you instead. Okay. Let's try this out. because I am aware of the time and I want to give people a chance to ask questions. I'm going to leave that, but I will drop in the chat right now. This video is on YouTube. It's from a recital Judy gave, an online recital Judy gave this summer, and this was the last piece on the program. So if you want to go and check out the whole thing, it uses a lot of really cool effects. It uses ankle bells. It uses all kinds of things. It uses a cymbal. Lots of crazy things. So I would encourage you to check it out, since I don't think we'll have time to go through more of it. So I was just showing you another section of the piece where she's using a variety of effects, lots of tuning key in one harp, and cymbal in the other harp. So I will allow you guys to go check that out. I wanted to show you now a little bit of Monica Pierce's piece Detach, which I recorded on my album that just won a Juno. It uses a lot of extended techniques in the opening of this movement. There's two pieces, Attach and Detach. Detach uses the most extended techniques, but you can see she's using like a circular motion. She's using some rhythmic things with the whistle hand gesture. She's got hitting of the string. She's got a xylo effect. So you can see all these things are notated here. I am going to play the opening of that for you now. You can give that a listen to. And I'm going to pause there because it's not an easy way to stop playing, but if I don't stop, I'm going to play the whole song. So that's an example of a piece that uses a lot of extended harp techniques, but in a really effective way. All right, I'm going to quickly bring you back to my PowerPoint. We're going to finish up, and I'm going to let you ask some questions, I promise. So just some final thoughts. Harpists, I'm going to say generally, I assume most of them do, love working with composers. So if you want to write for harp, I would not be afraid to reach out to a harpist you know, or even one you don't know. Take a harp lesson, sit down at the harp, actually feel what it feels like. Maybe not right now, it might be a little bit hard to do it right now, but when you can, I encourage you, it'll help you kind of understand a little bit more, maybe hands-on, why some things are easier or not as easy. Work with the harpist, share your sketches, share your drafts. They're willing to go through, check on it, see what's going on, let you know what's working, what's not working, and just, you know, be open, because there might be an extended technique or something that you wanted to achieve that isn't going the way that you really wanted, and maybe the harpist might have some suggestions for some workarounds, because as I said, those were a lot of extended harp techniques. Those are not all the harp techniques, so they may have other thoughts for you. Okay, my next slide is questions. So I've made it. I'm there. My last slide, just so I don't forget, is thank you. I want to thank the Canadian League of Composers for having me. It was truly a pleasure to be able to share with you all about the harp, and I hope I can answer a lot of your questions now.
Great, thank you so much, Angela. That was absolutely fantastic. And there's some more specific questions and some more general ones. I'll start with a specific one. I know that you mentioned that you have a sort of limited reach with your right hand. What would you say is a practical lower range limit in general for the right hand?
That's a great question. I would say, so I can reach very comfortably to the first wire string on the harp, which is the second G below middle C, with my right arm. I can, and I have in pieces I've played, like I mentioned, put the harp down, and then my right arm can reach a bit lower, maybe the E or the D. So
that's the G at the bottom of the bass clef, and then the E or the D below that?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
It's okay. So another question is, in terms of writing arpeggios, does it matter in terms of which direction they're going, which hand you start with? Can you start with the left hand above the right hand above the left hand? Is that something that you just would decide in the context of the piece?
Yeah, so I mean, the harpist will likely decide that, what works best for them in their hand. But yes, we can start with either hand. And if I'm at the top of the harp, if by the time the arpeggio ends, I'm quite low on the harp, then I'm going to pick which hand and which number of fingers I'm going to play in each hand so that I can get to the bottom of the harp so that I end with my left hand. So you can map it out or think it out if you want, but the harpist may just change it to what works best for them, depending on, I think that's more of a personal taste.
Okay, and just following on from that, do you prefer to have a clear separation of right hand and left hand in the notation from the composer, or is that something that you do just in the way it's played? So for instance, if there's an arpeggio which is separated between hands, do you want the composer to separate notes for the left hand in the bass, in the lower staff, notes for the right hand in the other staff, or just to notate it where it lies on the instrument?
Yeah, I think you can just kind of notate it how it lies in the musical staff, and then we'll go in and usually change the stem direction to help us remember which hand it's going to play it. Just if you're writing like more traditionally, then typically anything that we see in the treble clef we're going to assume is mostly played with our right hand, bass clef left hand, but then we might switch them around or move it around. So I wouldn't feel super bound to deciding which hand's going to play what, or even which finger's going to play what. We're pretty good at problem solving, that sort of thing.
This is just a question specifically about the video of Raga. So someone is asking, what is the technique at the end of the clip that you played where there was a chromatic descent? what was the technique on that?
Yeah, she was using a metal tuning key, and she was playing a passage, and I didn't play this part, so I don't know if I can. Was moving the, or I think she was starting doing that, going downward. So the metal tuning key was moving along the harp while they were playing other notes, including the note that was being, the pitch was being bended on. Hope that clarifies.
You talked a lot about our best friend Salzedo, but beside him, what would be one of your recommendations for go-to composers to study for very idiomatic harp writing?
Right. So Tournier wrote Marcel Tournier, my BFF. He wrote very idiomatic harp music. Alphonse Hasselmann, he did as well. So he was like late Romantic era. Tournier's impressionistic in his writing primarily, and he writes pieces that sit really beautifully in the hands and utilizes the harp resonance in a very beautiful way. Those two are great. Carlos Salcedo and Marcel Grangeny, I kind of call, and Henriette Renier. There's sort of what I call like the big four. So when the harp was like at the peak of its development, the double action pedal harp, we had Marcel Tournier, Marcel Grangeny, Henriette Renier, and Carlos Salcedo, who were all French harpist composers who all started in France. Salcedo and Grangeny moved to North America. Grangeny actually taught at the Montreal Conservatory for a period of time before he ended up in the States, which I think is kind of cool. And they did they just wrote a massive amount of music for the harp, which prior to them, there is music that is written for the harp, absolutely, but not anywhere near the extent. They really like populated our literature, the like breadth of our literature. So you can, I would look at any of their pieces and you're going to really see some very high level playing that's expected of the harpist, but you'll be able to see what they can do, what the harp can do, and how idiomatic it can be. So I would start with those guys. And you can hear all over the internet people playing their music because it is played all the time because it is so well written for our instrument.
Wonderful. I might ask you when we're done with the questions if you could pop those names in the chat for people, but we'll move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
For a minute. So in terms of harmonics, how many different pitches can you get on each string in terms of the different overtones?
That's a great question. I don't actually know if I know. Let's play. Let's see. So we get our basic one in the middle, and then I think it's the next one we're getting. Oh, what is that? Oh, I see. It's like it should be a G. My pedal was in a different position. Hence the F sharp I got. So I can get an octave above, and then I can get the fifth above that, and then let's see if I go. I can get one at the lower end of the string. So I would say 3 is probably safe.
And is there, and presumably there's more on the lower strings and less on the higher strings just because of...
Yeah, I would imagine. I think because it's harder to get the hand position, like even on the higher strings, right? When I get up here, we're kind of at the max of what I can do. I can't get much of the higher pitch there because the string is so short. I can really just get the one. And then I can't even get a harmonic on that string. I'm getting to the point where it's like just not feasible anymore. So yeah, you're right. On the lower strings, you would be able to get more range.
So in terms of detuning the harp, if the composer is using microtonal harmonies, is this something that most harpists would feel comfortable doing, or where would you place this in terms of like detuning a piano, or like is it somewhat easier than that, somewhat more accessible that harpists can do and are willing to do? And what sort of time and resources are required to go into that?
It's not hard to do. We just have to tune it that way. So It depends on kind of, I guess, how far you're going away. If you want me to basically take my harp string off, I'm probably going to say no thank you, because then I like essentially lose a harp string. Putting it back on, it's very likely going to break on me. But if I'm going like a quarter tone or a half tone or something like that, it's not a problem. It doesn't take very long to do. Demonstrate for you. If I have a... And I'm there. It didn't take very long. So it's yeah, it's not a long process to change it. The issue is that I can't change it very easily once it's set in the piece. So again, it's something you might consider about putting in a specific range. I know in The Crown of Ariadne by Schaeffer, he has the harp, I believe, started with quarter tuning, and then as part of the piece, the harpist retunes the strings partway through. So there, you can definitely like reference that as a good example for how to change that in the piece itself. I've only played one piece that has required it, and it was on a piece of a bunch of chamber pieces, so we had to be thoughtful about like where was it going to go in the program. There had to be time for me to retune the harp afterwards. But again, it doesn't take that long, and it doesn't sort of make it difficult to tune or bring back to your pitch later.
Is there a standard across most harps for the point of the instrument where the switch between metal and gut strings is, or does it vary on each instrument?
Yeah, no, it's the same. It's always at that G that I mentioned before, the one that's at the bottom of the bass clef, is where your first wire string occurs. Like very early harps, I'm talking like 19th century, early 20th century harps, had a Saturn nylon string on that particular string, but it's standard now. The wire strings always start on that G.
This is just a question about the differences in writing for harp with a large orchestra versus chamber or solo music. Are there techniques that work better with orchestra? Are there things that work less well versus when you're working with smaller groups?
I guess if we're talking about like extended techniques within the orchestra, you just have to think of the overall texture. So if you have me doing something like a whistle sound, right, where if you remember that was a very quiet sound effect I did, it's not going to be very loud within the texture of the orchestra. But if you had me do something like that crazy, like rattling the bass wires, that would cut through pretty well. So you just want to make sure that whatever technique you're using, you're thinking about how it fits in with the range, the dynamic range of what's going on around it. I think I've often had effects in the orchestra that have not really come through. In Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, in the first movement, the second harp actually plays the harp with spoons, and it creates it rhythmically with spoons, and it does this cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha thing that's really like effective, and it like totally cuts through the orchestra. So that's a cool one to check out. I hope that answered the question.
Besides the Salzedo book, which you've already mentioned, I don't know if it's even still available to get. Is there a specific book that you would recommend for composers as a resource on writing for harp?
Right. So the examples that I took out and showed you is from this book right here, which is Carlos Salzedo, From Aeolian to Thunder. It's his biography, and they have a whole thing at the end of his extended techniques. And he also has method books that you can read, and he shows techniques in those as well. Besides Salzedo, I don't have a specific reference that comes to the top of my mind. There was a book that I had accessed once at the UT library that had a bunch of extended techniques listed in it, and I remember one time someone had sent me somebody's series of YouTube videos demonstrating them, and I went on a big hunt trying to find that before this presentation and could not find it. But basically, if you want to hear some extended harp techniques, if you don't have a harpist you can talk to, you can always go on YouTube. There's tons and tons of videos if you type in extended harp techniques that pop up. Can't vouch for the like quality of all of them. I have not been through them all, but there are lots there. There's a harpist, I think she's in the UK. She goes by 15-second harp. I think on her website she's got some resources that you could check out. She's pretty cool. She takes like compositions that are 15 seconds in length from composers and workshops them and puts them up on her social media. So it's a great way to get your feet wet for writing for the harp without having to commit to anything super long. It's 15-second harp. And there are some resources if you look up this harpist Isabelle Perrin on her website. She's got like a catalog of the different types of notations found in Bernard André's music. Bernard André is another harpist composer, so like you'll find references like that kicking around the internet. That one actually, you know what, I can totally put that in the chat if that would be helpful.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. From my computer, how do I do? I've not done this very much, so just bear with me. So I'll pop that file in. So there's little things like that that are popping around on the internet. So I'm sorry I don't have like a one, this book is the best, you should use this book, but there are just a variety of things.
I know you mentioned some more composers that we can look at, but is there maybe one piece that that you would recommend that composers go and look at as just sort of maybe something that they wouldn't come across otherwise as a piece to become more familiar with harp writing?
One piece. Wow.
You just
a standard in the harp
send us in a direction that we.
Yeah. A standard harp piece is the Foray Impromptu, which is a really great one. So unless you're going to like harp recitals, you're probably not hearing it all around. It's a really great, very idiomatic harp piece. Very harpy. It's very harpy.
And this is the last question I think that we have at the moment is, could you recommend some method books for the harp that may also contain easy solos for non-harpists, for people interested in getting more familiar with the instrument?
Sorry, can you, okay, so method books, like beginner method books for the
Yeah,
harp?
like beginner method books in terms of learning the harp that maybe have some easy solos in there.
Oh, yeah, there are a bajillion. Suzanne McDonald is a very famous harpist in the United States. She wrote a whole series of books called Harp Olympics that have a lot of like harp theory and harp exercises, but have some really beautiful harpy little like mini harp miniatures in the back. You can also, she has like a book of just beginner harp solos. She's a really good one. Samuel Milligan's Fun from the First. That's a pretty beginner easy harp method you could check out. That's pretty, got some simple, very simple pieces. There's 2 volumes of that. Those 2 are really good. Trying to skip over ones that are not as good in my brain. The Suzuki method actually has some really good beginner tunes for harp that you could check out. Volume 1 is pretty good. They're mostly like arrangements for the harp though, but in a lot of these other pieces they are. But Suzanne McDonald will have the most original harp specific pieces in her Harp Olympic books, or her like, I think they're called like first stage harp solos or something like that.
Great. Well, we're running over time already, but there's just one last question in the chat.
Sure.
And one of the someone in the audience is asking if you could demonstrate repeating the same string, so not with enharmonics, but just repeating on one note, and what the fastest that could be repeated without it sounding too muffled.
Yes, that is a great question.
And not a little demonstration.
One that I actually, had thought of and then did not specifically say, but it was in Monica's piece, if you heard. Part of it will be like how fast the harpist can play. Again, this is an example where we can use enharmonics though, right? So if I strings, then I can, now I'm just basically trilling, but I can get really fast and the strings are going to ring better than if I'm just sticking out on one string for a long time. So that's about as fast as I can get right now. Every harpist will be different though. Some may be able to get faster than that.
Well, I think we're going to end on that note. Thank you, Angela, so much. That was hugely informative and I think a really great introduction to writing for the harp for people who are just getting started, or even people who have already had some experience working with it. So I just want to say thank you enormously from us here at the Canadian League of Composers for joining us. The Canadian League of Composers will have more webinars coming up, carrying on through the rest of the year. They're going to be approximately monthly, and the next one we will announce soon. So keep an eye out on all our social media channels and follow us there, and hopefully join us again on some of our future webinars. Great. Thank you guys all so much for being here.
Thank you.